Hello and welcome to this edition of the Workflow series. My name is Aron Korenblit. I'm going to be your host for the next 50 to 60 minutes. I am extremely excited to welcome you all. And we have none other than Joe Krug waiting to come on. And I'm extremely excited to welcome him as well. So we've got a lot of folks in the chat. If this is your first time joining, do say hi in the chat. Tell us where you're joining us from. Tell us what your spirit animal is. Thought that was a really fun one for today. We've got Andreas, who's a chameleon. We've got Darren joining from the UK. Welcome. Joe is both a guest and in the chat. So super excited to welcome Joe as well. So the Workflow series is where every 2 weeks I try to teach you something or give you a skill that you can use in your agency or in your in-house team right away to take your Webflow websites to the next level. 2 weeks ago, I had Corey on to come talk to us about the concept of frameworks, why they're important, how they're useful, and clearly you all enjoyed it. I had a ton of fun. You all had a ton of fun, and I'm extremely excited to continue the conversation this week with Joe Krug from Finsweet, who is the builder of Client First, one of the most popular frameworks here. So super excited. We've got Christian, Abby Starr, welcome back. Jazz from India, Ashley, who's a penguin. I love it. I love that as well. We've got Yasser. Thank you all so much for joining live. It means, the world to me. I'm super excited. Mike, welcome. Excited to have you here. We've got so many folks. Ash, New York. Fun fact, this is coming to you live from Brooklyn. So super excited to have you all here. We're 4 minutes past. Let's jump into today's topic. So we're going to cover the Client First framework with Joe Krug, and we're going to do that in 3 steps. First, I'm going to introduce Joe, talk quickly about the philosophy behind Client First, why Finsweet built it. Then we're going to jump into a live build, right? We're going to go ahead and see what it feels like to build with the Client First framework, so you can learn how to use it and also decide whether it's something you want to add to your toolkit. And third, we're going to take questions. So go ahead and drop your questions at any moment in the chat. We have Nelson helping me curate those questions, but I always have an eye on the Q&A, on the chat. So if the question is relevant, I'm always happy to ask it during, but we have dedicated time at the end to answer questions or for Joe to answer your questions. So before we introduce Joe, really quickly, go ahead and fill out the form you see pinned at the top, and that'll put your name in the credits with a special title for this week's credit. Always my favorite part of the stream. So ask questions in the chat, go out and fill out the form. And without further ado, I am super excited to welcome Joe. So please join me in the chat in welcoming Joe to the Workflow series. Joe, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you, Aron. I'm really happy to be here. Happy to be on a stream with you.
So I'm like a loss of words. I'm so excited. So Joe, before we jump into the nerdy stuff, tell us, what is your spirit animal?
Spirit animal is going to be a lion. And I'm a big fan of the lion because a lion is going to rest for most of the day. Lions are hanging out. And then when they need to jump into action, they jump into action for a short period of time, and then they relax the rest of the day. And I like to think of myself as doing that.
All right. Are you currently in relaxing mode, or is this hunt mode? Like which mode are you in right now?
I'm in relax mode.
Okay.
I love streaming so much that I feel always relaxed when I'm streaming. So I'm a lion laying under a beautiful tree right now.
Right. And you've got your I don't know what a squad of lions is called exactly, but we've got Florian, a pride. You've got your pride of lions.
Yeah.
Ashley, all welcoming you in the chat. Penny, Peter. So from me and everyone, we're super excited to welcome you and to talk to us about what I think is a little bit your baby, like something that you love very dearly, which is the Client First framework. So before we jump into building, let's start off at a high level. Talk to me about Client First, how it started, what brought you to building client first, and then we'll jump into actually building with it.
We built client first as a team, Finsweet team, so that we can all build the same way within the company.
Mm,
As Finsweet started scaling, we found that everybody had their own little nuances to how they built in Webflow. A little bit of different naming, a little bit of different organization. And as we scaled, it was more difficult for people to share projects. There was a little bit more of a learning curve when
mm.
you went into somebody's project. So we wanted to build a unified system that would help people work together and build in the same way. And after we built the internal docs, we said, well, this has to be made public, like most things we do at Finsweet. So we decided to release it publicly and let other agencies and freelancers, build in this unified way that we like and we agree with at Finsweet.
Got it. So the impetus, and this is very similar to what Corey was saying 2 weeks ago, is you want to be able to jump into a Webflow project and understand the spacing structure, the
Yeah.
naming, and that's true for your team, and that's also true for the client, right? And so this idea behind the framework was, hey, we have our own pain point, which is Alex may build differently from Akshit or someone else. Trying to remember your team's names here
Yeah.
and being able to share a common framework. So, uh, we thank you for open sourcing it to an extent and allowing anyone to then build upon that framework as well. So, with that in mind, let's actually jump in to your documentation and talk a little bit about the philosophy behind the rules that you set in place and how you kind of built it together. So, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So, give me a thumbs up here if you see it. Joe, you're good. Okay, so I'm going to go into your docs. Where do you think, where should we start, but where should someone understand what this framework is trying to solve?
I would scroll a little bit down to the goals section.
Got
These
it.
are all the goals that we're trying to accomplish with this framework. So, some of the challenges that we may have in building in Webflow, and I had these challenges when I first started Webflow. Confusion of how to name classes, right? We know how to name classes, we know the styles,
Mm,
but how do we name them so that there's some organization?
right.
How do There's a challenge of maintaining some kind of unity across all of the pages and all of your different projects. There's some confusion of how do I build a scalable project versus a micro project?
Right.
And then if you work with teams, how it's kind of difficult to work with other people when you're not working off the same system. So these were problems that I had personally, we
Mm.
had as a team, and then these goals are what we have to try to solve those problems.
Right. I'd love to know in the chat, what are some of the problems that brought you to client first or to frameworks generally? And I'd love as we go through kind of explaining how client first works that we kind of incorporate those. So me personally, naming a class is my nightmare, right? And I love the fact that we are so many nerds that also have the same issue because we want it to be communicative, we want it to be informative, and we want anyone to kind of understand what is going on. So I'm going to go ahead and drop the link in the chat to the documentation if everyone wants to kind of follow along here. We're not going to go through it, right? But these are the kind of high level goals that we want to fix. So, Joe, do you think it's better for us to start reading the documentation together? Or should we just jump into a project that has client first in it and we could start there to understand the kind of foundations of it?
Definitely jump into a project.
Okay. Okay. I built this one, so if it's not perfect, this is mine. But Joe, where does someone start to understand this framework now that we have a site that's built with it?
A good place to start is the core structure.
Okay.
The core structure are the outer parent wrappers that wrap the visual components of the project. So as we can see on the screen here, we have the page wrapper, which wraps the global styles, the nav bar, the main wrapper, and as we go inside the main wrapper, we have section, padding global, and container large. This is what we call the core structure of client first. And we use this core structure on every single page so that when you're in these different pages of the project, they don't have different ways of managing the layout, different ways of managing the core styles of the page. So this is where I like to start. This is how I start any first page in Client First.
Got it. So this hierarchy of divs is going to be consistent in every single page built in Client First. So this sounds like a great place for us to start. So Joe, can you talk to me a little bit about what each one of these at a high level does, and how does it help either the builder or someone looking at this understand what's going on?
Sure. We have the page wrapper as the outermost parent, wrapping everything on the page. We like to do this for, let's say, copying the entire page to another page, or maybe applying styles to the entire outer wrapper of the page. Inside that, we have a global styles symbol. This is an HTML embed, which has CSS styles that we've written that are not supported inside Webflow Designer. And these styles will be applied across every page of the project. And since they're inside the navigator, they will be visible inside the designer canvas. And let's go now to the main wrapper. The main wrapper is going to wrap all of the page-specific content. Now, what do I mean by page-specific? If we're working with the webinar page, it's going to have all the webinar information. It's not going to include the nav bar or the footer, which is global. This is on every single page. So now going further into that main wrapper, we have our sections. And on a fully built project, you'll just see inside the main wrapper a whole bunch of sections.
Right.
And you can see here we have the section _ webinar hero. So as you can guess, the webinar hero section. Inside that, the padding global class, very important class, very powerful. This is going to be a class that manages the left and right padding of all the content on the page. And I should say the outer left and right padding, not padding for, let's say, a testimonial item.
Right.
This is the padding for the page.
Right. There we go. We've got some, there we go. Got it. So I'm zooming in here. Okay. So these are essentially classes that we're adding to every single that do specific jobs for us, right? So main wrapper dictates the content that we're putting in. You're going to start every section in this way with an underscore, naming what the section is, padding, container, and then we get into layouts. So this is your approach to standardizing the way each page is built. So this is where I start. But now that we get here into, like, I can look, this is what we tried to build, right? Talk to me a little bit about class naming, and then maybe how I should approach building once I have that kind of standard sections or standard divs, I should say, put out or added.
You can see that some of these classes have dashes only, and some of them have underscores.
Right.
In Client First, if there's no underscore, that means it's a utility class.
Got it.
So the padding global, container large, page wrapper. Once we get into the layouts, the actual what we're building here, the Doggo CEO talks about what makes food delicious with the image. This is the page content. Right. We're going to use an underscore with that class name, which indicates that it's a custom class.
Got it.
In Client First, we don't use columns, utility columns. We don't use utility rows. Instead, we're going to build those directly onto the custom class.
Got it.
So in that navigator, webinar hero underscore, that's the webinar hero section, the webinar hero content, and we can go and style that however we want for the webinar hero. Got
it. So this is actually a different philosophical approach than what we had with Corey and Boilerplate, where your layouts are custom classes, but there's a naming convention that tells you that it is a custom class, B, where in the page this custom class is associated to, right? So if I look here, this is telling me that this is a grid wrapper. That's kind of like the name of the class, if we will. And it is related to Webinar Hero, which is a section in my page. So you don't provide layouts, but you do provide a way of naming And can you just quickly talk about the decision to not have layouts as something that you offer? Because 2 weeks ago in some other frameworks, it could be grid LG call 2, right? And being able to build those quickly. So what brought you to that decision?
We, as a team, felt that when you have those kind of utility class column systems, you end up adding a lot of classes to an element. You
Mm,
may add two, three, four, five plus classes to create the right layout that you need between desktop, tablet, and mobile. Because of how Webflow works, we found that deep stacking classes makes it a little bit more difficult.
mm,
And also, if you need a total different customization for mobile, you may be lost in that deep stacking of column classes.
got it.
So we like to use Webflow how we think Webflow is built to use that styles panel, right? We love using the styles panel, and it
Mm,
takes very little time to go and apply that grid system. So
got
that's
it.
the decision we took there.
Okay. And so what I'm hearing from you is essentially you said, hey, for us, it's easier to style these in a custom way because it is so easy to create those grid. And the trade off that you do is that you're not deep stacking layouts like grid, LG2, CC40, as we did with Corey. And this is amazing. Some people will prefer this, others will build otherwise. And that's, I think, that the beauty of these frameworks is you can pick and choose both from what you prefer from either, and kind of just build the way you want. And both of these speed up what you want to do, whether boilerplate, mast, knockout. I'm trying to name every framework that I can think of. Client first, you can pick and choose what you love about each. So super exciting here. So we've talked about the page structure. We've talked about layouts, right? We're going to go ahead and build in about 10 minutes. Can you talk to us about other things folks should know, things maybe like spacing or anything else that you think is really important for us to know before we jump in and try to rebuild this page using client first?
Absolutely. In the docs, the whole docs is all about different strategies.
Okay.
So after this stream, check out the docs and look at the spacing strategy. The We talked about core structure, the typography strategy.
Hmm.
All these different strategies are based on what we think are the most important keys to building a Webflow project.
Got it.
And that's how a lot of the system is organized. The utility classes, the utility systems are things that we think should be global in nature, where more of the custom classes are more for things that we want to take a design and turn it into Webflow.
Got
We
it.
don't want to think about how to structure global or utility classes with that.
Got it. So you have global classes for utility, and then custom are specific to what it is that you're building in each section. Before we
Right.
jump in, I do want to quickly talk about spacing, right? We're going to build live in a moment, but I remember when I was, wrestling is not the right word, when I was understanding, client first, spacing was something that, was novel to me. So talk to me a little bit about spacing and how you approach it, and then we're going to jump into the build.
We we apply our spacing, our utility spacing, to a blank div block.
Got it.
And as you can see from let's click on this padding bottom here.
Yeah.
This is a blank div block with padding bottom, padding large, which is creating vertical space on the page.
Hmm.
And you can take that div block and drag it anywhere you want. So a lot of frameworks or other ways of building may want to apply that directly to an element, right?
Right.
Right to the text element.
Hmm.
In client first, we like to apply that to the div block so we can drag it up and down and avoid stacking many classes on a single element.
Got it.
And this spacing is one of the hottest debated topics in client first, right? Some people love it, some people don't love it. So yeah, we give you a whole bunch of different ways to space things, but this is really the heart and soul of it, putting it on that blank div block and being able to change it visually inside Navigator.
Joe, I love the idea that there are Webflow lovers in a bar, and all they can talk about is, are you a rapper? Do you apply it on? And I know that
Yeah.
you are not joking where people spend hours, the pros and cons of doing both. So I love that you are taking a stand for your framework. You're saying we are Spacer, we are Team Spacer. So let us know if you are Team Wrap or Team Spacer in the chat. Uh, um, and it, I don't have a bone in not a, maybe I like both. I have learned both. You know, as a host, I will stay impartial. So Gabe says the doggo is staring directly into my soul. Yes, completely. So I have both the dog and Joe staring right into my soul. So this is quite the intimidating situation right now. Okay, let's go ahead and let's jump into actually building this with client first. We're going to test the naming structure. We're going to understand how spacing works. So Joe, I'm going to go into this blank page, right? So let me just bring my mouse here. We're here, webinar right here. So what I've started with is I've done maybe the first couple of steps. I have page wrapper, global styles, nav bar and footer, and the main wrapper, right? Where do I go from here to recreate this right here? And we're going to try our darndest not to cheat, right? So what goes after the main wrapper and how do I build this in client first?
Right inside that main wrapper, we're going to add a section. So that could be the section underscore hero.
Okay, so div. So we're adding a div, we're adding it to the main wrapper.
Yes.
And then
hmm
this is a section. So sections always begin with the word section, right? And we're going to call this just hero, right? So imagine section hero. There is no styling applied. We are not spacing at this moment. We're just saying this is section hero. And then what are the classes that come after that?
Inside that, we're going to go with our page padding
Got
class. I'm sorry, it's not called page padding. It's called padding global.
it.
Padding dash global on that div block.
I know where to find the
And
answer. So core structure,
yes,
here we go. This is your friend right there. Page wrapper, main wrapper, we have those section, we call this hero. Padding global is next, right? So you don't need to memorize this. You just need to go to the documentation. Here we go. So main wrapper, section hero, padding global. Container large, this is making our container. We have different types of containers. Let's do a div. Let's go into here. Container, large. Okay, so far so good. What else do we have here as our structure? And then padding section large. Now, if I look at this, now that I have the structure, how do I think about this? Should I add padding on the section itself? How am I thinking of
I
building
would
these two
not.
sections? Yeah.
So to answer the question about that padding section, we wouldn't want it in this use case. One of the great parts about the core structure is that you can choose to add these elements or not add these elements.
Mm,
So for example, here we wouldn't add it because that doggo is right on top of the nav. There is no section padding there. So
mm.
I would start with the first custom element here in the layout.
So he's just staring into my soul. He just, it's just such a
It
cute.
is.
Oh man, we could stand here all day. Okay, so you're saying we don't need necessarily this padding section large because we don't want any padding here at the top, right? So we can
Right.
omit that div. However, when I look at this, how would you go about creating this layout, right? Both from a naming perspective, but also how do I kind of build it out?
I would use CSS Grid for that.
Okay.
So I'd go add a div to the page, give it the hero underscore, we can call it wrapper. And I would apply some grid to create that content left and then that image right.
Okay, let's take a moment here. Let me just set up our basic grid. We're just gonna have, two columns. We don't, just one row. There we go. Okay, now I wanna take a moment. You call this hero underscore wrapper. So hero comes from the section because we've called it hero. And then wrapper is essentially us trying to communicate what this does. And it is a custom class because layouts are custom.
That's exactly correct.
Look at,
Love it.
you know.
Perfect explanation.
I might have done this a few times. I knew you were coming, so I try to come prepared. Folks are complaining about, not complaining. Folks have noticed the nav and I designed this. That is on me, and that's why it doesn't look fantastic. But we wanted to show, but I can remove the nav bar, the little footer, if it's annoying people's looking at the screen. Okay, so we have our layout, right? And then we can adjust that as we go. So from there, if I look at here, how do you think about this on the left? So should I just add the content and we'll style it later? How should I approach this?
I would add a div block that will hold all of that content.
Okay, so we're adding a div block here on the left, right? So this is wrapping all that content here. No naming for now, right? You want me to just go ahead and add the content and we could style it later?
We can.
Okay.
We can. We can go and add that H1 there.
Okay, let's go heading. And
you know what? I just can't move forward with that blank div block name. Can we name it? Can
absolutely.
we go back?
Joe, tell me.
Let's call that hero_content.
Okay. Joe does not accept blank divs.
I just can't. Can't.
That's okay. Everyone's different. But you decide the framework, so you set the rules. So this is a no blank div space. That's good to know. Okay, so I'm adding the H1. Let's style this in a moment. Let's go ahead and add just the date, right? So we have this icon and then some text. So let's go add an image. Let's choose that image. This one right here. Is that the right one? No, it's the date one.
No.
Let's go date and let's add text. Now, does your framework distinguish paragraph versus text block, or is that more of a personal preference from your perspective?
No, we like to follow the semantic rules of HTML, which would suggest that this is not a paragraph. It's text information, so it would be a text block. Perfect.
Got it. Okay, so there I'll wrap it in a div in a bit, right? Because we know these two are going to be wrapped in a div. We can do the little line in a moment. We'll figure out how we want to approach that. So let's just add the content itself. Let's add a paragraph. Let me copy paste here. And let's focus just on this content, and we could see if we have time to do the form and if there's interest in the chat of doing the form. Okay, now that we have all of our content, talk to me about how you approach making this look like this in client first.
Let's start by creating that padding around the content.
Right, this right here.
For this use case, yes, that and also the left and right. As you can see, that's not exactly lining up with our padding global. And there's a little bit more space on the right than the left. So that's telling me that should be some custom spacing here. And I would apply that directly to this hero content class.
Okay, so let's rem. So
always rem.
Okay,
yeah.
This I feel like is a good moment as I'm gonna try to guess what the padding is. Talk to us about the difference between pixels and rem, M's, and why you went with rem, but only 30 seconds. I don't want this to become a 30-minute conversation around pixels versus rem.
We chose rem as the default unit for all of client first because of how it reacts with the browser. When you're on a client first project and you zoom in or zoom out on the browser, or you change your browser's default text setting, rem is going to react right with that setting change. So we believe this is really powerful. It's a great accessibility update and a great accessibility feature. And with rem, everything is relative to that HTML tag. So everything is rem, right? The text is rem, the spacing, the everything. And because of that, we can scale that website up and down and even fluidly with a tool that we have.
Got it. So because it is both a way to make things more accessible, and it's an approach where everything scales with the root right, font size, which folks can move up or down, right, depending on how they prefer to see the content. And we'll talk about that kind of mobile approach in the Q&A about how do you adjust the rem based on the size of the viewport for folks. Thank you for keeping that to a reasonable amount of time so no one falls asleep. But I guess the people watching do love that. So let us know if you are Team Rem, Team M. There's so many teams on these frameworks, which is a lot of fun. Okay, so I've added some spacing. We can adjust that as we go. Now, talk to me about how do I make this kind of look closer to this, knowing that I'm using client first.
Sure. So let's first go and add that wrapping div to the calendar icon and the text.
Okay, right here. So let me wrap this in a div block and let me drop that in. So for me, these two are Flex, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I'm understanding you correctly, Flex is a custom class.
Mm-hmm.
So this would be hero underscore. Now I still can't believe this framework's is going to make me figure out names. So Joe, help me out here. Hero underscore.
I would call it a date row.
Date row.
I would call it a date row. Yeah.
You're good at this. You're good at this.
And I would also apply that to to that wrapping div.
Man, I got ahead of myself. Hero underscore date row. There we go. Okay, and this is flex. We want a horizontal. Let's put some spacing between the columns. I always have to imagine in my brain the difference between column and rows. I can't. It takes me a moment. So 1 rem. There we go. That feels about right. Okay. Yeah. So now we've got this right here. Where do we go from here?
Now we need to create some vertical space between that title, between the date row, between that line.
Right.
So we have two options here. We can either use a spacing block, like we looked at earlier,
mm-hmm.
or we can apply the spacing to the date row. Which one do you want to do?
Joe, I invite you to not make decisions that people may disagree with. I would rather that all things that people don't like be attributed to you and not me.
Good.
So I will let you decide what you prefer.
Let's show both methods.
Okay, sure.
I think it's good to show both here. So in between the heading 1 and the date row, let's add a div. And let's apply a padding bottom, padding medium to this div.
So first, we're saying padding bottom to say that we want to apply padding bottom. And then as a combo class, we're specifying what size of padding. So padding medium, right? And this is applying to rem as padding. And this is a spacer, right? So if I go here, it's spacing between the heading and that custom class we built a moment ago.
Exactly. Now let's go create that space under the date row. And I'd also like to apply that border, that line we have, directly to this date row class.
Got it.
So what we can do is create some padding bottom on this class.
On the custom class, right? So you're
on
essentially
the custom class.
Because we have this line, you're saying we might as well put the padding in this row right here and then, put a border there because we already created a custom class, right? Instead of adding a spacer div and then potentially another div just for that line, you're saying, let's put some padding here, let's say 2 rem, like that. And let's add some, every time I get on the stream, I lose myself completely. Where is my
border?
That's because I'm like
a little further down.
I'm like far away from the screen and it. Okay, so we want this to be 1 pixel at the bottom. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it is white 30%. Yeah, pass through white. There we go. Let's go to white and let's go 30%. Let's look at, okay, we've got that little spacer here at the bottom. I can preview. We've got that spacer right here, and this is looking good. Now, Joe, before we continue, question for you. How do we make this text look a little bit closer to this? It looks like we want to keep it in H1, but this one feels a little lighter, potentially, maybe like an H2.
Sure. So we're always going to want to keep that H1 for as the HTML tag to tell search engines and any kind of screen readers that this is the main heading of the page.
Got it.
But we have a set of utility classes that will change the visual look of that H1 tag.
Mm,
So we can go in our heading style utility class system, heading dash style, and we have a whole list of our H's,
got it.
H1 through 6. And if you go apply that H2 there, it's going to
Mm,
make it a little bit smaller and make it look like the
right.
H2 in the project.
Right. I don't think I have the same fonts, but we're getting to that style. We can always update the
Yeah.
fonts later. Okay, so this is looking good. Now here, similar to this, we have different text and different spacing. So how do we
Mhm.
go about getting closer to this?
And again, we have that choice with spacing. We can apply a margin bottom right to the date row class,
Hmm.
or we can use another spacer block. It's up to us.
Got it.
We that's a great part about client first, especially with spacing. We have that option:
Got it. So,
custom class, spacer block, or even spacing wrapper.
okay, let's go ahead and what do you, again, um,
I will make the decision
I
here.
punt it back to you.
Yes, I'm going to apply it right to the date row.
Got it. So right here,
Yeah,
you're
to the
saying
date row class. Yes.
we want to add some margin here. Let's do to rem. There we go. So we're pushing this away by not creating a spacer div, but using the fact that we've already created a custom class to space things out like we did right here. Okay, now I'm realizing that maybe my spacing a little too much here on this one right here. Again, I never want to get into a space too deep of a spacing conversation, but there we go. Now we're much closer to what we had before. So again, here the text doesn't quite look like this. How do we get it to something that's closer like this?
We can use a utility system called text size. So
Okay,
text dash size, and we'll get a list of all the sizes in that style guide.
got it. So we're
So maybe
saying
we go medium.
medium.
How
Okay,
would
that
that
definitely,
say? Yeah.
there we go. And these, for maybe a good, I'm seeing a question in the chat. The fact that they're already in my style guide is because in my selector is because I've copy pasted the style guide. Correct?
Right.
Okay. So for folks who want to get the style guide, it's in the link in the description and it's going to be in a pinned comment. So this is what you need to clone to start your project. So you have all of those styles already ready. Okay. We are there. I think the only things left here is to go ahead and add our image, right? So let me go ahead and just simply add it to the right. Let's go ahead and come here. Where am I? I'm in, let's go here, hero wrapper, and I add my image. Let's choose the doggo. Nice. And I think if I'm not mistaken, if we did this before, we simply need to make it 32 rem. And this would be a custom class, correct?
It would be. Yes.
Okay, so hero underscore image.
Perfect.
Nice. It's almost, I'm starting to get it. Hopefully everyone watching is kind of starting to see how client first becomes part of your workflow. You can understand how to name things. Spacing becomes much easier. And there's a reason why it's so popular within our community. Okay, let's do 32 rem, if I'm not mistaken. There we go. That looks good. It looks a little large. We're not going to get too in the weeds around styling, but we've just built out a page. So now's a good time if you have questions for Joe, go ahead and drop them in the chat. We're going to jump into Q&A in just a moment. And also, if you haven't yet filled out the form for the credits, go ahead and do that. So we're going to jump in. Joe, is there anything else that people should know about in building before we jump into Q&A? So Pog goes, can you go over image placement again? What I simply did was add it into our grid, and then I've made it min width 32 rem. That matches the width of this nav bar, right? So that was kind of built in. This is a custom class. So I'm happy to kind of go over, but that's more CSS questions. So Joe, are there things that people should know about when building in client first before we jump into Q&A from the chat?
Well, I would say in client first, it's all about being in charge of your decisions.
Hmm.
It's one of the reasons I love it. That you make these really careful decisions about how to name things, how to apply spacing here, how to do whatever you're trying to do. So I would leave you with that advice. It's all about decisions,
Got
and
it.
it's a framework for making those decisions.
Exactly. So it sets out rules and decisions to help you make the decisions, classing, spacing, mobile kind of sizing. So question from Andreas, client first style guide. So you can get it in many places. Let me jump back. Actually, no, let me keep on my screen. So you can get the style guide from the link in the description. We have a link to the clonable. You can go to the documentation, right, of client first. So let me drop that link as well in the chat. All of these have, and you could also just go to Made in Webflow and get the style guide, and that's the place where you should copy or start your projects from. So all of those styles are pre-built, and the stream we have 2 weeks ago with Corey has a link to many frameworks, client first included. So go ahead, clone those and have some fun. Okay, so let me go ahead and jump into the Q&A. Go ahead and drop your questions in the chat and make sure to fill out the form. Joe, one question that I have for you, and also in the chat, was mentioned a few times. Folks mentioned a Chrome extension. They mentioned Relume. Can you talk a little bit about the ecosystem of client first and how the style guide fits into that ecosystem?
We offer Finsweet extension, which has some really cool tools that go right together with client first. My favorite being folders. So if you follow that dash or underscore system that comes with client first, it organizes all of your classes into a folder structure. So if you're using client first correctly, you can take a step back and look at all of the classes in your project organized by folder. And this is really useful for people that want to be really specific about how the site is organized. Also in the Chrome extension and on the docs, we have our fluid responsive generator. If you're using REM, as recommended by client first, you can make your entire site fluid responsive. That means when you make the viewport larger or smaller, the entire site is going to adapt to that changing viewport. And it's just a CSS snippet that works together with REM. So those are the tools that we offer. And then the public ecosystem, the biggest and best tool we have is the Relume library. This is a rock solid components library that uses client first. And you can create sites very quickly using Relume. And then you change the name, you apply some styles, and now you have a fully built website in client first with just a few clicks through Relume.
Got it.
So a lot of people start there, right? If this is a lot of information and the docs are huge for you, go start with Relume. Check out some of those components, start building a site, and then get into the docs to understand the specifics.
Got it. So the Chrome extension allows you to create folders, right? So you can visualize all the different classes that you've created. Then you have the fluid responsive generator, which adjusts the spacing that each kind of spacing div creates, that you can adjust yourself. You copy paste that code. And then finally, you can use Relume as a starting point, or actually, I think it's a great place to just build, right? You just go and get the component, you style it, and it already has that class structure from client first. As someone who is terrified of making naming decision, that definitely feels like heaven to be able to just grab something and then adjust it to how I need. So I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Keep them coming. We do have maybe 5-6 minutes more with Joe. So Brand Ocean asked the question, what if you need to change spacing on whoops, 1 second. There we go. I messed up. Let me unpin, select. There we go. What if you need to change spacing on multiple spacing blocks at once? How would you approach that?
Well, If you're talking about changing the CSS property value, that works perfectly with the utility system. You
Right.
change that property value, everything updates. If you're talking about changing, let's say, spacing large to a spacing medium, you'd have to go remove the large class and add the medium class.
Right.
So that is something if you needed to do 3 changes on the page, you have to go and do that for 3 different times.
Got it. Let's maybe just quickly explain the difference there, because this is, I think, really important. So let's say here I said padding bottom, padding medium. I can probably say medium means something different for me. Is that correct? I can say I want it to be 2.5 rem because I like a lot of space. That's going to change every time I change medium. Correct?
That medium will be updated for the entire project.
Right.
Yes.
And is that something you recommend against?
No.
Okay.
No, of course not. You can change any of the values in the starter template.
Got it. So that, and if you do want to visualize what 2rem looks like, you can go into the style guide, right? And then say, okay, my padding global is this right here, right? So that is, my kind of, sorry, padding global. I should go into, I don't want padding global. I want the utility classes. Where are they? Max widths, padding bottom, right? And here is where I can see what padding is being applied for each one of these. And I could say, well, I want medium to be, bigger or larger. I'm not going to do it. And then I'm adjusting client first for my specific project. And then all the spacer divs will adjust based on the decision I've just made.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it. Awesome. Let me see if there are some more questions. Nelson, if there are any questions that I'm missing, go ahead and drop them in the chat that we have together. Let me come back here. Right.
Can I pick one question?
Absolutely. Go for it, Joe.
I would love to answer the question from Sebastian. Does creating many divs cause performance problems on a large website? No. The answer to that is no. We have found with many different use cases, many different tests, that if you load a web page, even with a whole bunch of spacing blocks on it, it's not going to cause any performance problems or any alerts inside of a, let's say, Google Insights Manager. Something that would cause some problems, things like a Lottie animation. You can have exponentially more elements on the page, more nodes on the page using Lottie than something like an empty div. So no, we don't have any problems with that. Confirmed.
Got it. So the decision of adding divs as standalone divs, whether for spacing or for that page structure, has no impact on the speed of the page or on its kind of SEO value. If anything, it makes it better.
I wouldn't say it makes it better necessarily. It would either make it equal or just not worse, right? It's not going to hurt your performance.
Right. Understood. Okay. Do we have any more questions? So I'm going to give a moment here to ask questions in the chat and go ahead and fill out the form so folks can see themselves in the credits. Joe, where would you recommend people go from here to either understand client first, to learn more about it? Are there any communities where folks can give their input? What do you think is the best next step for folks who are discovering client first and starting to get used to it?
I would say start with some of our live builds. I did a couple live builds, Harshit's done a couple live builds, and we go through building an entire page using client first. I'd also recommend checking out Relume. This is a great way to see the structure and how elements can be organized with client first. And then if you like reading, if you want to get deep into the thought process, then go into those docs. So one of those 3 things: live builds, Relume, docs.
Got it. So there is a lot to go from here. More live builds. There's a question around, can we use other things than rem? My understanding from you is that rem is pretty much baked in to this framework, and it is a core component of how it works.
We recommend rem, yes. Can you use other units? Absolutely.
Mm,
However, when you go and use that fluid responsive tool, only REMs are going to respond. If you use pixels, they don't respond to that tool,
got it.
which were a lot of clients like that. That fluid responsive, the design stays exactly the same no matter how big the screen is.
Got it. So you can, but then the fluid responsive generator kind of, doesn't really add any value because you're no longer in REM. So
And there could be one more. So,
yeah, go
and there
ahead.
could be some accessibility issues.
Right.
That's another thing, right? Like using viewports. Yeah, you can use that viewport width. You can use it, but you may run into some accessibility problems with that.
Got it. So question from Juan, why not use a section as a div and not the div itself? Sorry, why use a div as a section, named
Yeah,
section, and not use the section element?
sure. We don't like using the section element in Webflow because it can't be nested.
Mm,
There is a rule in Designer that you just can't nest a section in a section. So maybe you need to move things around, or a section now becomes just a normal layout inside of a section and
got
you
it.
can't nest that. So we just start with div. There's no real purpose, or there's no real difference between the section and the div.
Got it. Okay, perfect. There are some questions in the chat, but that aren't necessarily folks are asking where to go watch the live builds. I'm sure they're on your YouTube channel. So, Joe, thank you so much for. I'm gonna string this out for about 30 to 45 seconds to let people fill out the form, right? So, Joe, if there are questions that you're seeing that you want to go ahead and answer, but I think mainly what I'm seeing in the chat is a lot of love for client first, right? Not only client first, but all of the different uh, uh, features or functionality that you build, whether that's the Chrome extension, working with Relume. So thank you from myself and everyone in the community for everything you do and build for Webflow.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was amazing.
All right.
Amazing being on here.
Amazing. So we got thank you from Yasser. We've got lots of love from the chat. If there are still questions that we're not answering, shoot me an email or shoot Joe an email. Always happy to answer those. Fantastic. Okay, cool. So let's go ahead and start the credits here. So folks, last chance to go ahead and fill it out. So Joe, just want to thank you again for coming. It was an honor to host you. And would you please read the credits with me as we go here? Let me bring them up. Here we go. So who do we have who joined today? So a huge thank you to so many. Olamide, we have Kevin, we have Aaron, Ivan, Penny, Magdalena, Eric, Chaos Lord, I love it. Susan, Frank, Zahib, Ash, Samir, Rohan, some names you recommend. I recognize Abby, Pablo, Max, Akansha, Dahlia. We will see you back here next week for a stream with Nelson. So Joe, one last time, thank you again so much for joining.
Thanks, Aaron.
Have a great day, everyone. I'll see you back here in 2 weeks.